The London Beer Flood of 1814, when a city drowned in ale. Imagine this. You're standing in the heart of London on an ordinary October afternoon. The air smells faintly of malt from the breweries that dominate the city's streets. Suddenly, without warning, you hear a roar. Not thunder, not gunfire, but something stranger, louder. A sound like the world itself splitting open. And then it comes. A wall. A rushing tidal wave. Not of water, but of beer. Yes, beer. Enough ale to drown horses, smash houses, and sweep entire families away. This is no urban legend. This is the true story of the Great London Beer Flood of 1814, a day when celebration turned into tragedy, and an entire neighborhood was swallowed by the very drink it was famous for brewing. London, 1814, a city of beer. To understand this bizarre disaster, you need to picture London in the early 19th century. This was the age of industry, of steam, of coal smoke clinging to the rooftops. London was the largest city in the world, bursting with over 1 million souls. And like any great city, it ran on alcohol. Beer wasn't just a luxury, it was survival. With clean drinking water often scarce and unsafe, beer was the daily drink for rich and poor alike. Taverns buzzed on every corner, and massive breweries rose above the streets like cathedrals of fermentation. One of the giants among them was the Mew and Company Brewery, located on Tottenham Court Road, just north of Soho. The brewery specialized in porter, a dark, strong beer beloved by London's working class. To meet demand, the company built vats so colossal they were practically monuments. How big? Try to imagine this. One vat alone held over 500,000 liters of beer. That's nearly 1 million pints, enough to keep an entire town drunk for weeks. These vats towered over the brewery's workers, bound with thick iron hoops and perched inside enormous wooden frames. They were engineering marvels, but also ticking time bombs. The vat that couldn't hold October 17th, 1814. The Mew Brewery hummed with routine. Workers stirred, measured, and prepared barrels for the endless demand. But one vat in particular, a monster of a cask holding 135,000 imperial gallons, was in trouble. For months, employees had noticed something unsettling. One of the iron hoops securing the vat was slipping loose. But such accidents weren't unusual. The vats were so heavy and pressurized that minor cracks and leaks were part of the job. The solution? Hammer the hoop back in place and carry on. But this time, the pressure inside the vat was building. Fermentation produced gas, pushing against the wooden staves. Hours ticked by. The hoop sagged lower. Workers barely had time to react when, boom! The vat exploded. The force was so powerful that it ripped apart the entire back wall of the brewery, and the flood began. A wave of ale. What spilled into the streets of St. Giles was no mere trickle. Reports estimate that more than 1.4 million liters of beer, yes, over 1 million liters, rushed out in a single wave. Imagine a tsunami, but amber and frothy, thundering through narrow streets lined with fragile wooden homes. The waves surged with terrifying speed, smashing walls, sweeping carts aside, and toppling everything in its path. The first victims were caught instantly. In nearby tenements, cramped, overcrowded housing where entire families shared single rooms, the flood burst through doors and windows, leaving no time to escape. One tragic story tells of a mother and daughter who were pinned beneath rubble as their home collapsed under the force of the beer. Others were swept into cellars and drowned before they could climb out. In a local pub, patrons were engulfed as the flood crashed straight through the building. And remember, this was St. Giles, one of London's poorest districts. Cellars weren't cozy basements, they were living spaces for families who had nowhere else to go. Those cellars became instant traps as the beer poured in. The aftermath. Chaos in the streets. When the flood finally subsided, the scene was devastating. Streets were soaked in beer, houses lay in ruins. The stench of alcohol hung heavy in the air. 8 people were confirmed dead, though survivors swore the toll was higher. Most victims were women and children, unable to escape the sudden torrent. For days, rumors spread that the flood had killed dozens more, their bodies hidden beneath wreckage or quietly buried by grieving families who didn't want the scandal. And then came the crowds. News of the disaster spread fast, and curious Londoners flocked to St. Giles. Some came to mourn, others to gawk, and many to drink. Yes, Residents brought mugs, pots, and even buckets, scooping beer from the gutters. Some got drunk right there on the spot. Others filled barrels to take home. The streets became a carnival of chaos, mixing grief with drunken revelry. But amid the mayhem, one question lingered. Who was responsible? A trial by beer. The Moo Brewery faced immediate scrutiny. After all, it was their vat that had exploded, their beer that had destroyed homes and lives. Surely someone should be held accountable. But when the case was brought to court, the outcome shocked many. The jury ruled the disaster an act of God, an unforeseeable accident. No negligence, no penalties. The brewery was spared. In fact, they even received a tax rebate for the lost beer, ensuring their business survived. For the victims' families, there was no compensation, only the ruins of their homes and the memory of loved ones swept away. Still, the brewery's reputation was scarred. The image of Londoners drowning in beer was too grotesque to ignore, and slowly, the city began rethinking how such massive vats should be constructed and monitored. The flood in memory. The Great Beer Flood faded into history, overshadowed by wars, revolutions, and greater disasters. But for those who lived in St. Giles, the memory lingered. Generations later, descendants of the victims would tell stories of the day the beer came. Today, it almost sounds comical, like something out of a tall tale. Beer flowing like rivers, crowds scooping it up in tankards, an entire neighborhood smelling like a brewery. But behind the bizarre imagery lies a very real tragedy. Families destroyed, lives lost, and a stark reminder of how fragile life was in industrial London. And perhaps a lesson in hubris. In the race to build bigger, stronger, more impressive machines, safety was often an afterthought, until disaster struck. What if it happened today? Now pause for a second. Imagine something like this happening in the modern world. Picture a football stadium filled to the brim with beer, suddenly bursting, flooding an entire neighborhood. The videos would go viral instantly. Social media would erupt with hashtags. Lawsuits would bury the brewery in court for decades. But in 1814, people shrugged. They buried their dead, salvaged what they could, and life went on. It makes you wonder, have we really changed, or do we still underestimate the dangers of the machines and industries we depend on every day?
The wave. That time forgot. The London beer flood remains one of history's strangest disasters. A moment when joy turned to sorrow, when the drink that symbolized celebration became an agent of death. 8 lives were lost, countless others scarred.
And yet, out of the rubble came a story so surreal that it's still told 2 centuries later. Next time you raise a pint, maybe you'll think of St. Giles, of the mothers and children who never stood a chance, of the flood that swept through London not with fire, not with plague, not with water, but with beer. So what do you think? If you had been standing in that London street in 1814, would you have tried to outrun the wave, or grabbed a mug and joined the chaos? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into one of history's strangest tragedies, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because history is full of stories even stranger than fiction. And you won to want to miss the next one.